Hey everybody, I'm Jason Mefford and I am here with Brad Miller, and today we're going to be talking about values and beliefs. So Brad, I know you saw a quote this morning that's kind of the genesis of what we want to kind of talk about, at least to kind of start the conversation, then we'll see where it goes. But why don't you read that quote, because I think it's, as we were talking about before we hit record, there's a lot of places we can go, so let's see where we actually go. But let's give people the context as to why we want to talk about this.
Yeah. So the quote that I found this morning was, true growth is not growing inside of someone else's systems of values and beliefs, but finding and discovering your own. So true growth is not growing inside of someone else's systems of values and beliefs, but finding and discovering your own.
Mm-hmm.
So like I said, there's a lot of different things I think that are kind of wrapped up in that.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe
I kind of heard
Oh, I was going to say, yeah, since you brought it up, kind of what was the first thing that hit your mind when
yeah,
you read that, and then I can kind of share mine, and we can see where we go.
sure. Yeah. So the first thing that kind of hit my mind when I read it this morning was the idea that for most of our lives, we are kind of told how to think, what we should believe in. I mean, it starts when we're young, when we're kids. And I know I deal with it with my 7-year-old, trying to instill certain values and things like that in her, but also allowing her to kind of choose her own paths and things like that. But the idea that we are told by society, by those in our professions, that there's a certain way that things should be done. There's a certain way you should act. There's certain things that you should believe in. For instance, in the law, one of the kind of predominant beliefs is that being busy is a good thing. We kind of hold that up as like a badge of honor, like, oh, how you doing? Oh, I'm just so
Oh,
busy.
I'm so
Well, you must be
busy.
doing great. Great thing. That's kind of, the most common answer I get when I talk to lawyers and say how things are going. It's always, oh, I'm so busy. Things are busy. And we kind of hold that up as, oh, this is a great thing. Busy must be that I'm doing well, if I'm so busy doing things. And this is something that we've kind of been cult by that society, the profession has put into us, instilled it, that's the thing. You're strive to be busy, that busyness is a sign of good. But there's something that I've been kind of pondering the last week or so is that necessarily true? Is it true that being busy is a good thing, that busyness equates to being a good lawyer, or being a good accountant, or being a good engineer, or the quality of the services you provide, or how much you're helping others?
Yeah.
And so for me, this quote kind of stood out as saying, hey, there's a lot of things out there you've been told, a lot of things that society is kind of putting on you, and for the most part we just kind of buy into it. We just kind of go with it because that's the world that we live in. But when we sit back and say, wait a minute, is that really what I believe? Is that really the truth? That's when we start to grow. That's when things start to change for us. And for me, that's part of when I started going down that spiritual path, is when I started to question some of these things and not just take them as the gospel truth when they came to me, or when they were presented through the profession or society. So
Well, and I think that's important because I think, I mean, like I said, there's several different ways to go here because my mind is like right. But I think it's interesting, right? Because I think one of the challenges that a lot of people have when you start down this path is you start questioning some of those things that you've been taught, right?
mhm.
And
Yep.
because you've been taught, because you've spent 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years being taught one thing, right? And so a word that a lot of time people will use is indoctrination, right?
Mhm.
That we're indoctrinated the minute that we pop out in this world, right? We start getting indoctrinated or programmed by those people who are around us, by the society that we happen to live in, right? And it's different in different places. I mean, I was talking to a guy this week who's he's Indian, ethnicity, and he was talking about his wife and how he met his wife, and he kind of just dropped in there, yeah, it was an arranged marriage. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. People still have arranged marriages, right? And even though he's American, right, it was still kind of a traditional Indian uh, arranged marriage with his parents, and then kind of coming together and asking each other a few questions, and it's like, okay, well, you'll be a fine wife for me. That's pretty much what he was saying, right? He
Check
asked
the
her one
box, good.
question,
Yeah.
and she kind of answered the way he was expecting, and he's like, all right, cool, she's good enough for
You like
me.
pizza? Awesome.
Ah,
We
yeah,
can make
there
this
you
work.
go,
Yeah.
there you go, we can make it work, right? But again, it just brings up, I mean, that's totally different than the indoctrination that I got about how I was supposed to pick someone to marry, right? And there's nothing wrong with his view. There's nothing wrong with my view, or probably what you were taught, Brad. But there's just differences, right?
Yep.
And I think a lot of times as you start to wake up, you start to question some of these things, right? And a lot of times that can be a little scary because other people don't understand why you're choosing to believe something different, or why you're choosing to value something more or less than what they do, right?
Mhm.
And I know sometimes that can be challenging, and that's why, knowing other people that are kind of on the path or listening to podcasts like this are helpful, because sometimes we sit there and we think, man, am I just crazy or what? I mean, is everybody else around me just like clueless, right? And so hearing somebody else kind of talk about it, or at least, bring it up and question it, I think is helpful as well. So yeah, there is that indoctrination, and at least for me, what's been really interesting is the older I get, the more I see how almost everything I was taught is correct is not really correct.
Yep.
Right? And a lot of times what's true is 180 degrees off what I was taught, right? So like I know you brought up the busyness,
Mhm.
and that's one that just drives me nuts, right? When people are like, I'm so busy, I can't talk to you. I'm so busy, I'm so important, right? And it's like, so much of the time when people say that, it's like ego just kind of jumps in the way, like, well, I'm busy, so that means I'm important.
Right. Yeah. I'm important.
And
I'm doing important things. I'm good at what I
important
do.
things.
Obviously, people want to talk with me. Like, yeah.
Yeah. But then when you stop and you're like, well, but being so busy usually means that monkey chatter that we've kind of talked about before is going on in your mind, and you're so busy being busy that you never actually kind of pause and are in the silence that we've talked about before. And so again, that's why I would kind of look at it and say, well, is being busy really that good of a thing to be? Or maybe is it more valuable to be in silence and to only be focusing on the things that really matter? Right? Because I think, anytime from a coaching perspective or anything else, when I've kind of talked with people about this, you find out that probably 80% of what we do, we don't even need to be doing. It's just busy work that doesn't actually contribute materially to whatever it is that we're doing. And I don't know if
It
that's
just
been
makes
your,
us feel like we're doing something. No,
yeah,
yeah, exactly. Like it's all this busy work. You feel like, hey, I must be productive because I've got all these things I can cross off my list now. But what did that really do for you, for your business, or to go towards your goal to be able to cross these 5 things off? Um, and they didn't. It was just you feeling like, hey, I'm doing something, so that must be good. Do.
well, we've talked about that before, I think already, right? Do. versus the being. Sorry, I had to throw in a poop joke, right? It's like the 5-year-old in me is
It's all
coming
right.
out,
It's
right? Yeah.
it's a Friday, so it's fine. That's
but I think it's like you said, it's interesting because when you start to think about and maybe we can maybe we talk about a few of the basic indoctrinations that I think maybe most people have, that a lot of the people that are maybe listening might be questioning as well. And again, I mean, this is coming from our standpoint because, we're both in America, you guys can see who we are, right? I mean, and so again, Brad and were probably indoctrinated in some of the same ways, but different ways too, because we had different parents and we grew up in different parts of the country, right? But one of the common indoctrinations usually relates to religion, right? So some of the things that you're taught, and again, I know we kind of talked a little bit about this beforehand in our stories, but a lot of people are raised to believe in God or a certain kind of stereotype, a certain archetype of what God is, right? And in the U.S., it's usually a white bearded man that sits in the sky, right? I mean, that's kind of the representation that most people have of God, and there's only one God. And then if you're Christian, right, then there's again some confusion between the Trinity, God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. And are they really one person, or are they three different people, right? Which again varies depending on the religious upbringing that you had, but you were obviously taught something from your parents, from your preacher, whatever that you had kind of growing up. And some of you might be saying, you know what, I don't believe in a white bearded man in the sky. That's okay. A lot of people don't, right? There's a white bearded guy sitting here talking on this stupid podcast.
He's not in the sky, and there's no
I'm not in the
clouds.
sky, and anyway, but don't come worship me or anything. I mean, but it's that's one that you see a lot. And so obviously if people step forward and say, you know what, I don't believe in that concept of God like I was taught as I was growing up. Now, it doesn't mean you don't believe in God. It doesn't mean you don't believe in some higher power. But the minute that you start questioning it or saying it to other people, right, who don't understand that, a lot of times there's a challenge, right? And I love how, I'm going to try to paraphrase it. I'll get it wrong, but Albert Einstein, I remember one time somebody asked him if he believed in God, right? Which, again, most of the time if you ask somebody, do you believe in God, Brad? We usually expect a yes or no answer, right? But the way Einstein responded was, well, tell me what you mean by God, and then I can tell you whether I believe in what you're meaning by God. And I always thought that was a very interesting way to kind of approach it, because it's the same thing, and it kind of depends on who I'm talking to. But if somebody were to ask me that, do I believe in God, and I have to have a yes or no answer, the answer would be yes. But I probably don't have the same structure around what that person asking me means is God. I probably don't have the same view or belief that they do, or how they've constructed their God, right? But yes or no, I would have to say yes. Right? But how I believe is usually radically different than, if a born again Christian came up to me and asked me that question.
I mean, it's all on the definition of in this case, God. What does God mean to you versus the person asking the question? And there's no way for you to know without, asking them what it is. Einstein was right. What does this person mean to you? What a God is versus what does it mean to Einstein? Two different things. And it's just all based on your perspectives and your indoctrinations and everything else. Things like that, what exactly it means. And so, and I
Yeah,
think
well,
I
yeah.
was gonna say religion is a very interesting one because a lot of people I think are brought up into some sort of religious belief, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
And the question then becomes how, is that something you stay with? Is it something that you know, I don't want to say rebel necessarily, but you try to have your own opinions of, and
Well, and I think too, with some of the indoctrinations, it's whether or not those values and beliefs that you've been indoctrinated in, if you identify with that, right? Because
if
if
they work
there's
for
a
you.
yeah, if there's a strong identification with some of these beliefs, it's harder for you to let go of those things as well, right? I mean, if you were raised Catholic and you've always been told we're Catholic, right? And that's one of those where, especially I hear this a lot with Catholics and Jews, right? I'm Jewish or I'm Catholic. Now, a lot of times when people say I'm Jewish, they're meaning more from an ethnic than from a religious standpoint, because most of the people who say I'm Catholic or I'm Jewish, they don't go to church. They don't go to church each week, right? They might identify as those things, but a lot of times when I start talking with them, they don't actually believe what the religion believes, but they still identify as that thing, right? And so I think too, as you're on the path, if you strongly have kind of like a core identity belief with some of these things, just realize it's sometimes harder because you're now dealing with an identity crisis, not just a, Brad, I think you're full of shit, kind of thing. Like when my brother starts talking sometimes and I'm like, yeah, that's not right. Right? There's a difference there where if somebody else is talking to me and I'm like, yeah, I don't really believe that. Right? That's I think a lot of times easier to reconcile than some of those deep-seated identity beliefs.
Well, I mean, if we really want to go down the rabbit hole, we could talk about, how identities are formed, and if that's a product of your indoctrination, the identities, and then really sitting down and looking at those and invest and evaluating, is this identity I want? What identity do I want? What's going to be in my best interest? What's going to serve me best for my growth and as I move forward?
Yeah.
Um,
Which is probably a great topic for another podcast, just to hold people on and make them have to keep coming back, right?
that's right. That's
but
right.
but
On
I
the
was
next
saying,
episode,
on the next episode, but maybe what are some of the other things that you kind of see from an indoctrination standpoint? A lot of times that people maybe start questioning, or that are some common things that people are dealing with. We talked about
well, we
busyness. We
talked.
talked a little bit about God, religion.
Yeah, I mean, business is the big one. And the funny thing about busyness is that from a 3D standpoint, if you ask somebody, nobody says, "Oh, I love being busy." Everyone always complains about being so busy and they never have time to do things that they really want to do, but yet they still hold this badge up that, "Oh, I'm busy." Um, and so I always find that really kind of fascinating of, well, why is this such a big, great thing for you if you don't even really like it? But that's just what society tells us that we should do, is that busyness is what we're striving for, I guess.
Mhm.
But I mean, kind of related to that, success. What does success mean? I think is something that we're taught. Success has a certain meaning generally regarding money, how much money you're bringing in. And if you have a certain amount of money, then you're successful, whether that's 100,000, a million, 10 million, whatever that dollar, that amount might be. If you hit this certain threshold, maybe it's, personal to you, but if you hit this financial threshold, now you're successful. And if you don't hit that threshold, well, then you're not really successful as you could be. You got some work to do, um, and that's something that I know, especially in the legal profession, is kind of looked down on. You get the bigger firms and the monies and things like that, that the salaries that they offer compared to some of the smaller firms, and kind of comparing, well, how much am I making here versus there, and people looking at where jobs do I make the most money, and that's a big decision of where they go. And money's just a really big thing that's kind of pushed down on us, I think. And it all ties into this idea of, for a lot of people, of what is success mean to them. What does it mean to be successful?
Yeah.
And there's still a lot of people that I see that put money, a dollar amount, a figure in that when it comes to what does success mean to them. That's hitting that threshold.
Yeah, because I think there's a lot of money stories that are fed into the indoctrination, but especially as you were talking, it's funny because I think, and again, this is just me anecdotally, right? But the two professions, because I think too, a lot of times success is associated with a money amount, but sometimes too, people view whether you're successful or not as to the profession that you've chosen, right?
Yep.
Sometimes there's an indoctrination in that. And the two professions that I'm just going to bring up as an example are doctors and lawyers.
And lawyers. Yeah.
And the reason for that is that, especially in some families, right, there is an expectation that you will become a lawyer or you will become a doctor. For whatever reason, those are like two of the professions where sometimes the parents place a lot of pressure on the kids to do that. And especially if you come from a family of lawyers or doctors, right? It's like my dad was a lawyer, my grandfather was a lawyer, so I'm supposed to be a lawyer, right? I mean, there's the whole identity thing again that we talked about. But what's funny is those are two professions when I talk to people. And I'm like, so you're a doctor. Do you like being a doctor? No, I hate being a doctor, but it pays really well. But I hate it, right? And it's like, interesting, right? So again, they're placing the financial and maybe the way people are viewing them as quote unquote being successful as being a doctor, but they're doing something that they don't like each day. And it kind of goes back to that busyness thing that you were talking about. What's funny is how so many people hang on and continue to do something that they don't like or they hate, right? Because they're not willing to change their values or beliefs. Or
They're afraid of
just admit to it.
Yeah, and they're afraid of the expectations that, well, my parents think I should be a doctor, and so if I don't do a doctor, I'm going to disappoint them, and they're caring so much about other people or what somebody's going to think of if I do this or don't do that, and as opposed to just doing what's true to them, what's important to them, what do they enjoy, what do they feel is their calling. Like, that's, to me, what's more important than what somebody says that you should or shouldn't do.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting is that, along this, as I've been coming along the path and trying to learn, what's interesting is when we, because that quote says something like true growth, right, only comes when you're actually kind of following your own values and beliefs. And what's interesting about the spiritual path is that, in order for us to evolve, in order for us to kind of become more powerful, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it, we have to stop giving away our power to other people, right? We have to kind of take back what we've given away. Because, throughout our whole life and as we're being indoctrinated, we're kind of losing some of that power, losing some of that light along the way. And so if you're just doing things or believing things, having values or beliefs of other people, and only giving into that all the time, you're kind of like slowly leaking out all of your power. And it really isn't until you start taking it back, you start doing and thinking what you really believe instead of what somebody else is telling you to do.
Mhm.
that is, to me, where the true growth really comes, which again lines back with that quote that you had today.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, and that's talk about power. That's a whole other episode too. Um, and
Hmm.
just what it is, why it's important, why we should care, but yeah, it's again, to me, this quote really goes to talking about being true to yourself at the end of the day, and figuring out what it is that you believe, and that what's works for you, what's a value to you, um, as opposed to letting other people dictate or tell you what.
Well, and I think too that maybe we give some people here as we kind of wrap up this particular episode something that they can kind of think about or work about too, because I think as you were talking, one of the questions that you brought up was, is that really what I believe? Right? That I think as people start sitting down and asking themselves that question, right? Yeah, is this really what I believe? Is this really what makes me happy? Am I really happy, with the life that I have right now? As people start asking those kinds of questions, things will start popping up. Because I know for me in my life, I mean, I remember I was getting some advice and guidance from one of my mentors, and it was about a relationship that I was in, right? And so again, it was not what I was expecting, right, from the response. But I remember him asking me, "Are you happy?" And when I was actually honest with myself and I said no, I felt this huge rush and release, and I started
Mhm.
crying. And I knew at that point that I had been lying to myself for a long time, thinking, well, it's okay, it's pretty good, but I really wasn't happy. And until I admitted that to myself, I couldn't release, and I couldn't decide or choose to do something different about that relationship to go forward, because I hadn't honestly, authentically answered that question to myself. I was lying to myself for years about this particular relationship, thinking, oh, it's good enough, or it's okay, right? And so again, as those of you that are listening, start asking yourself some of these questions, because again, we're not telling you what to do or that what you're doing is right or wrong, because for every person it's a little bit different. But do you really believe that? Do you really want to do that? Does that really make you happy? Those are some questions for you to start kind of sitting with, um, because again, most of the time, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling dejected, if you're feeling pitiful, I mean, a lot of times the reason you're feeling that way is because you're not being honest with yourself. And so the actions or the relationships you're in don't align with your higher self. And until those things align with your higher self, it's going to be hard. And I know a lot of times, and I'm the same way, where it's like,
Mhm.
but it's hard to change. Yeah, but isn't it harder to continue living in those things than to just rip the band-aid off? You rip the band-aid off, it's going to hurt for a little while. It's going to hurt like hell, but then it goes away, right? So would you rather have that niggling kind of pain throughout the rest of your life, or would you rather just rip the band-aid off and move on? I'm a kind of the rip the band-aid off guy, but hey, that's
I can
me.
see that. I can tell that. Yeah, but and I think a lot of people though, it's the fear, And again, coming from the law and knowing other lawyers and kind of how personalities tend to be, I think that that's an issue, that lawyers are afraid of what it is and are afraid that the Band-Aid's going to be worse than what they're doing now. And they feel safe because at least, they know what they're dealing with now. There's no idea what happens when they rip that Band-Aid off. How, all the terrible things that may happen to us, and we may get infections and we may have gangrene in there, and who knows, we may find there's a tumor growing, like all these things that worst case scenarios are worried about, because that's what, as lawyers, we kind of tend to do, is look at these worst case scenarios. We were always trying to spot problems and try to think ahead and how do we, mitigate this and everything else. But if we don't rip that Band-Aid off, if we don't change, we don't have to face those situations. It may suck now, but you know what? It could really suck down the road if I make that change. So I think I'm better off just staying where it is, and that keeps a lot of lawyers particularly trapped because of that, because we don't want to change. We're afraid of that change.
Well, and what's funny is, at least when I've looked at my life, I don't know if this is the same with you, Brad, but every time I've been afraid of doing something, but I did it anyway, it usually worked out better for me. Right. Mm-hmm. So again, even when I, on one of my other podcasts, we just reran an episode that I did over there called, Feed Fear, Suck It Sandwich, right? And if I wouldn't have gotten censored, I would have put, Feed Fear a Fuck It Sandwich. But anyway, I think you get the nice, literary alliteration with the F's there. But what's funny is, even though I know that, even though I have a lot of evidence, right, that every time I've been afraid to do something, but I've done it anyway, it's always worked out better for me, right? I have a lot of evidence of that in my life, but I'm still human, and there's still times when I get to that point and it's like, oh, I really don't want to have to do that, right? And so then that Tanal, the ego, kind of jumps back into me, of trying to talk myself out of it. And I just have to look back and remember and just trust, right? Because I think that's part of it, is just trusting that it is going to be better, right? But like you said,
it's a survival mechanism.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I'm the same way.
To save it. Yeah.
I'm the same way, when I was going to college, right? So in high school, the bookkeeping accounting classes, I took like 2 of them in high school. It just came really easy to me. I got like A's in both of those classes. It was really simple. It seemed to make sense to me. But when I went to college, right, I didn't want to be an accountant, right? And so, I was a finance major to begin with, because I was going to buy and sell companies and, get into high finance, do leverage buyouts and all this kind of stuff, right? The whole Wall Street movie kind of stuff.
Sure, and then brokers and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as I get into it, I have 2 brother-in-laws who got finance degrees, and they're like, dude, don't get a finance degree. You can't get a job with a finance degree. Get an accounting degree, because at least with an accounting degree, you know everything that we've learned, but you can get a job. It's a safe degree to get a job, right? And so again, even though accounting came easy to me, it wasn't what I loved. Finance, or even my favorite course in college was psychology. Yeah, so I became an accountant. That makes a lot of sense. But hey, it was a safe thing to do. It was the indoctrination that I'd been given. It was what guidance I was being given from people around me that I just believed, right?
Yep.
Which is interesting. I mean, and again, there's no there's nothing wrong. I think that's part of the journey. But once you start realizing it and waking up, when you know better, you have to do better. And so once you start questioning or asking yourself some of these things and you know better, now you have to do better, right? Because if you know better and you don't, then you're kind of going backwards in life, which is not a good place to be in either.
Yeah, no, that is one of the, if you want to call the downsides of walking a spiritual path, is that as you start moving forward and you start learning things and getting these lessons, you kind of have to live with, you have to follow them. I mean, you can't just say, okay, that was a nice lesson to learn, and then just kind of throw it to the side and keep them on your merry way. You've got to actually implement it and live what you've learned.
Yeah, and because
and
there's a too, along with this, and I've had this kind of discussion with a few people in my life recently. I kind of said, once you know better, you have to do better. That's something that I used to tell my kids when they were little. But kind of on the spiritual path, there's also kind of a universal or cosmic law of once you know, you can't unknow, right? And so I've had a few things that have happened in my life where I just knew certain things. There's no logic. I don't have a spreadsheet that I can point to that explains why this is right. I don't have scientific studies that show that this is, what I'm supposed to do or whatever, but I have had knowings that have come through very strong, that I just knew certain things, right? And again, when you know, you can't unknow. But there's been people in my life who have been, well, yeah, but that doesn't really make any sense. Just because you thought that, you don't have to do that. And it's like, no, you don't understand. Once I know, I can't unknow. Well, you just change your mind or forget that you felt that.
just forget it. Yeah.
That ain't how it works. You can do that, but then you move back in retrograde seriously, right? At that point. So, that is one of the things about being on the path. Once you know, then you have to change. You have to do something different. So it was that way, when I was having that discussion with my mentor. And it's like all of a sudden I had that knowing. I knew I wasn't happy. And boom, I just had this knowing, and I knew that I can't be in that relationship anymore. Now I know. And so it would hurt me to continue to have a relationship with that person. I have to leave, right? And again, even though it might not make logical sense or anything else, once you know, you can't unknow.
Yeah. The saying that I use is, once the bell's rung, you can't unring it.
Mm-hmm. Can't unring it. And for whom does the bell toll? Sorry, I had to throw in a little Hemingway there, and then Bukowski, which is one of my favorite authors too. Is like on the flip side of it. He's like, the bell tolls for no one. Anyway, all right, there we go. So
there you go.
Weirdness about Jason.
Ignorance is bliss. Maybe that's the moral of the story, is that ignorance is bliss. If you don't know, but
well, and a lot of people do choose to stay in that state, and which again, I mean, there's no judgment. If you want to do that, that's fine. I mean, the fact that people are listening, the fact that you're listening to this right now means you're probably not one of those people. So yeah, is that really what you believe? And if you know it's not, right, then you can't keep living that way either, which is an interesting point. So,
yeah. We tend to think of like the walk the path, spiritual path, like an upward, up the mountain sort of a feel. But I think sometimes it's more, you roll down the hill. Once you kind of learn that lesson, you just kind of have to keep rolling with it, because if you try to stop, you're just going to go and crash into something. So you're better off to just kind of keep moving with it and move forward. And so,
Well, and actually, that's a great little analogy or thing to think about too, right? Because like you said, I think most of the time we think everything is just kind of onward and upward, but there are little setbacks. There are other things that happen, and one thing that I'm learning too is in order to create, you have to destroy. You know, if you want to remodel your house, you got to do some demolition, right? If you want that new bathroom. And it's that way in our personal lives. It's that way, you know, in our beings as well, that sometimes to go forward, you have to go backwards a little bit, or maybe it feels like you go backwards a little bit, or there has to be some destruction before you can create again. Just like if your cup's already full, you can't put any more in. You have to pour some out before you can get something else in, right? You have to have a clear container. And so, yeah, it's like we're going up the mountain, and then all of a sudden, you know, we start rolling down the hill. Like, it just reminds me of The Princess Bride. Do you remember that scene in The Princess Bride where he's like rolling down the hill because she hits him or something like that, and he's like, "As you wish." Anyway,
yeah.
Yeah, and then she's like, "Oh my gosh, Wesley," and she throws herself down the hill too.
Right when she realizes it's him.
Yeah. So sometimes we get thrown down the hill a little bit, and we just have to roll with it, like you said. But then you're going to bottom out. You're going to stand up. You're going to shake your head because you're probably a little dizzy, and you're going to go, "Okay, where am I? Now, where's that mountain again? Over there. Okay, now let's start heading that way again." And that's just part of the process. So, well, we went to a lot of different places than I even thought we were going to go to on this one.
No, and as we were talking there in the background, I could hear a bird chirping. So that's very interesting. So,
omen or
thank
agreement.
you guys for listening. Yeah, there's a lot there. I'll let you think about that. What do you believe in? Not just what other people are telling you, but what do you truly believe about that bird? Is it was it there for a reason, or was it just that Jason had the window open? It's up to you to decide.
Tweet.
So.
So,
anyway, before we get really goofy and go down some really crazy things, we probably should wrap this up.
Yeah, we should.
I'm already starting to go down like, oh, we got like social media and Twitter and like all these. We don't want to go there. So
tweet.
Right, that's exactly right. So thank you all for listening. And before we lose everybody, we're going to end this episode. Thanks again. If you appreciate this, you found value in it, please give us a like, give us a review, preferably a positive, like 5-star one, if you would, and share this with others. Because as I like to say, if you found some value in this someplace, I'm sure that others will as well. So.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you on the next episode.
See you then.